Today is April 22nd, 2021. My name is Andrew Simpson. I'm interviewing Lauren Sanchez for Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas, Austin. Um, Please know, Lauren, that this recorded interview will be placed at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas, Austin, in the Brown University's library's digital repository. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's a topic that you don't want to talk about, please bring it up, or that you do want to talk about, please bring it up and we can discuss it. Participation in this study is completely voluntary and you are free to withdraw from the interview at any time. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need you to record you consenting to participate in this interview. I will ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. Voices of a Pandemic wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs or other documentation that you wish to contribute at the Benson Library, UT Austin, and Brown University's digital repository. The Voces Oral History Project can retain copyright of the interview and any other materials that you choose to donate. Number 1, do you give Voices of a Pandemic Project consent to archive your interview and materials at the Benson Library and Brown University Library's digital repository?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant the Voices of a Pandemic copyright? Do you grant the Voices of a Pandemic project copyright over the interview and any materials that you choose to provide?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree to allow Voices of a Pandemic to post this interview on the internet via the Voices Oral Histories YouTube channel where it may be viewed for the public?
Yes, I agree.
We have many questions in the pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure server at University of Texas, Austin. Before we send your information from the pre-interview form to the Benson Library, we would have stripped any contact information for yourself or your family members so that you will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in the public file to researchers at the Benson Library? So you're connected connected to journalists?
No.
Okay, cool. On occasion, the Voces Oral History Center receives requests from journalists who wish to contact individuals who have participated as narrators in oral history interviews. The Voces Oral History Center only responds to reputable news outlets. Do you consent for the Voces to share your phone number or email with journalists that are interested in your story?
No.
Awesome. Cool. Now we can get started. So to get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, where are you and your family from originally? Where do you live right now? What's your life like?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Long Island, New York, and that's where a lot of my family is now. I'm currently at school in Princeton, New Jersey. Spent a lot of time in New York during the pandemic. But yeah, that's where I've lived my entire life. Both my parents were born in the United States. My dad originally in Chicago, my mom in Long Island as well. And my grandparents immigrated from Puerto Rico when they were in their mid-teens, and initially were in Chicago and then again moved out to Long Island. So I have a lot of family in Long Island and extended family in Chicago and family still back in Puerto Rico. But our main connections are to Long Island itself, which has a pretty big Hispanic community. yeah, we're a big family. So like my high school that I went to had I want to say like 3,000 people were at the high school, big community. And it was the same high school that both my parents went to, my grandparents, aunts, uncles. I went to school with a lot of my cousins at one time. There was 8 of us in the same school, which was really fun. So really big extended family life back home.
Cool. Yeah. So what, like before the pandemic, even maybe before college, what was your academic experience like? Like what was high school like for you?
So I went to a really big high school. So there were lots of different things going on, and I was kind of isolated from a lot of the school because I was enrolled in AP courses and honors courses, which was a very small segment of the school population, which I enjoyed. The school wasn't the best on Long Island. Probably like weekly fights a couple times. Cops were called, a lot of bomb threats, which at the time I thought of as a joke because they mainly were. They were kids just trying to get out of class. But reflecting back on that and talking to people who went to different high schools and realizing that bomb threats aren't a normal thing was kind of jarring.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, there are a lot of times where we would have to have our bags checked coming into school, at times metal detected, and things that I didn't think that were particularly strange. I always thought it was very dramatic, but then again, like leaving high school and seeing how it's done other places, realizing that it was not by any means like the roughest area. I never felt unsafe or uncomfortable, but definitely um, towards that end of the spectrum. But I didn't really experience a lot of that again because I was pretty sheltered in the AP honors courses, um, which I was really grateful for. I really enjoyed academics. Our school was not known for sending people to college. It generally didn't. And it particularly didn't send people to Ivy Leagues. So that was not something that I was anticipating ever being able to do. Um, the academics weren't super challenging. I think the biggest pressure was to take a lot of AP courses, which I didn't do. Like my senior year, I took 4, which was quite low. Um, a lot of other people were taking 7 to 8.
What?
Yeah. And not doing particularly well in them, I would say. The way our school graded, you could get away with taking a lot of AP courses and your GPA would be fine. And then you really wouldn't do well in the exam. So I kind of strayed away from that and took fewer and did really well in the exams. And I thought that was better for me. I was really involved with the Model UN team in high school and as well as our band program. I really enjoyed both of those activities. And then I rowed. I didn't row for my school. We did not have a school team. So my parents were able to and willing to take me to a private club team 7 days a week. So we did a lot of driving, and I was really grateful and lucky that my parents were able to do that. That
Yeah.
was kind of my school experience.
Awesome. Did you ever feel like you had to take precautions to like ensure your safety? Because I know girls at my school, I went to kind of a similar high school. Girls at my school would sometimes bring like tasers or like stuff like that. So I'm just curious.
Um, Interestingly enough, not in high school. So I never had any kind of like personal protectant on me. Um, I definitely didn't hang around outside the building alone. I didn't walk places alone. In my own like development, I was like, I never like would hang out like in my front yard or go for a walk in my community by myself. I would not do things like that. Um, but then going into college, interestingly, which I think is kind of ironic because I went to a really safe community and a really safe college that was quite different. That's when I started carrying mace because I was older and separated from my parents, but I never felt the need to do that back home.
Interesting. Speaking of like, so went through high school, you go to Princeton, like what was that experience like going from like a pretty um like low performing high school to like Princeton, like a very like struggling, impoverished high school to Princeton? Was that like a jarring like culture shock for you at all?
I actually made bets that were sort of a joke, sort of not a joke with my friends and how long it would take me to drop out. Um, so I bet I could last like a semester. Um, and surprisingly, I am graduating. So I really outperformed. But it was definitely a culture shock, not so much in academics, I don't think. I think I was anticipated being really underprepared academically. And I don't think I came in underprepared. I think I was able to adjust well. And I think part of that was the courses that I took. Like I never was very interested in hard sciences or math. So I just kind of avoided those courses and took things that I knew I would like, new things that I knew I had a background in, and also really took advantage of a lot of the resources early on. Like I didn't hesitate to go and get tutoring or go and work on problem sets and groups. I didn't submit a single paper my freshman year without going to the writing center first. But I never did that because I felt like I would do poorly if I didn't. I just knew the resources were there and wanted to use them. So academically, I think I adjusted pretty well. Um, Socially, it was a big culture shock. And I think part of that was that in my high school, I was never really, um, like, this is going to sound weird, but I was not like grouped as Hispanic in high school because I came from a community that was probably like a third immigrants, either first or second generation. Some people who had been born abroad and came to the United States. They all spoke Spanish, and they generally weren't in the higher performing academic classes. And that was kind of what it meant to be Hispanic in my community. And I was not like that. I was second generation. I'm half white. I, in most instances, pass for white because my skin color is pretty light. Um, my parents didn't teach me Spanish. So in high school, I was essentially white. And then coming to Princeton, I was very clearly not white. And that was a really shocking and jarring experience.
Is that like not white to yourself, like compared to the people around you, or other people like uh kind of like noticing it and then that making you notice it? Like,
I
was it?
think more of the second one initially, and then you kind of start to pick up on it yourself. Um, Being asked questions like, where are you from? And then responding Long Island, be like, oh, then where is so and so from? Or a lot of assumptions that I would speak Spanish because my last name is Sanchez, and having to correct people that I don't know what you're saying. Please don't speak to me in Spanish. Um, Things like that. Or just, and then I think also hearing other people's experiences in high school and growing up and contrasting them with my own lived experience and realizing again that what I never thought of as odd was definitely not the normal.
Right. And what do you identify, if any of the terms like Latina, Latinx, um, Chicana?
I
Um,
generally identify as Hispanic, even though I didn't feel as if I was grouped in that category in high school. I still very much identified with um, my Hispanic culture and upbringing because my dad's side of the family is aside from Puerto Rico, and I grew up very close to them. Like my dad's brother lives around the block from us, and we'd go there almost like every day. We just walk over. We ate a lot of Hispanic food, listened to a lot of Hispanic music, had really big family gatherings like multiple times a year. Um, so it was very much a part of me. I just was very aware that visually I didn't match that category, at least in my community back home.
okay. Yeah. And so at Princeton, what do you study?
I study politics and ethics.
And how do you like that? How's that going for you?
I've liked it a lot. I'm really interested in those broader questions about like what ought we to do, what is justice, and I'm really interested in American politics. Um, yeah,
Do you think that like your experience, just like growing up in a underserved high school, or like just like your background has influenced your like academic pursuits?
I definitely think so. So I think growing up, a big part of what I how I became interested in politics is from my dad. He is a union leader on the Long Island Railroad. So we grew up in a pretty political household because of railroad politics and union politics. So I heard a lot about how government worked through that, which was really interested me. But more than that, like hearing stories of how both my parents grew up, they grew up pretty low income, seeing educational disparities in my own community from my parents really encouraged me to want to do something about that. My little brother is disabled, and special education was never really great in my high school. So seeing how the system failed him really wanted to make me get involved. And I think also seeing my community contrasted with the communities I went to row um, always struck me as there's some like, wow, my like we joke about my school being bad or ghetto, which it wasn't ghetto by any means, but these are things that like students made comments about because like ceiling tiles would be falling out or there'd be leaks, or one year someone set the art room on fire, like things like that. And then hearing like more affluent, primarily white communities that had rowing teams going there and hearing about their high school experiences, or like who was getting into what colleges, really made me realize how my community was being underserved.
Right. That's that's so interesting. Um, so after Princeton, like you're moving on. What do you think are the next steps for you?
Well, next year, I'll be pursuing a certificate in public policy at Rutgers University. I'll be on their rowing team there, and I'm on scholarship, which really helps make that a possibility. And then I don't know what I'm doing the year after that, but in 2 years, I'll enroll at Harvard Law. I was admitted through a 2-year deferral program this summer, which was really, again, did not believe that that was going to happen. I got a phone call from the admissions office at like 9 a.m. in the morning. And I remember hanging up and calling back my boyfriend and telling him that I just got prank called. And I did not tell anyone until I got the official email later that day. So I went like a few hours just thinking that, no, I must have misheard them. They called me to tell me I didn't get in, or no, this was a prank, even though I don't know how or why a prank caller would know the name of my interviewer and call me and tell me I got in. Um,
Yeah.
but that's what I'll be doing. And I don't know what I will be studying there yet. So I'm glad to have the time to figure that out. But I'm very excited.
That is incredible. Do you think like I mean, Princeton undergrad to Rutgers to Harvard, how is your community and like your family reacted to just like this path of excellence that you're on?
Both my parents are very, very proud. Um, yeah. My dad didn't go to college out of high school. He went to the army, which was just a thing that you did if you were poor and didn't do well in high school and couldn't go to college or have any career options. So he did 2 years in the army, and then has worked since. Again, he's a union leader on the railroad. So a lot of the work that he ends up doing is similar to law. He does arbitrations, he negotiates contracts, things like that. And from his experience there, the whole family kind of feels that if he had had the opportunities when he was younger, he would have gone to law school and been a really good lawyer. So it was kind of a big thing for me and my dad for me to be able to do that. Um, yeah, but I think there definitely is, again, like a different culture, not to say like that my older relatives aren't very proud or happy. I'm not sure if they fully grasp what these institutions are,
Okay.
um, or what I'm doing at them. But I think to them, they're just excited and proud that I went to college, period, um, and that I can do those things.
Right. So your dad is a union worker. That's can you talk a little bit more about that? That's so interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he works in the Long Island Railroad. His primary occupation is a lineman. So those are the electricians that like climb the top of electrical poles for the railroad. And he started doing that, I want to say like 25, 26 years ago, somewhere in that range. And the railroad is like one of the few really good public service jobs left. He has a great pension, great health care, um, a lot of benefits, and especially a lot of benefits considering how little education is required. You don't really get that nowadays. You really need a college degree to get those kind of benefits, and you don't need that on the railroad. So he did that for a few years, and then like right after I was born, got involved with the union, and he's been involved since. So for the past like 20-ish years, he was the president of their union for a bit, and then became the chairman, and that's his position now. And elections are every 3 years. He's been elected again pretty much since I've been born. He's very good at his job. He cares about it a lot. He talks about it a lot. But yeah, it's been really great to be able to see what union politics is like and to be able to see labor relations as someone interested in law and politics and things like that. But my dad also enjoys it. He definitely complains about it. It definitely is a headache at times, but you can also tell that he really loves what he does.
Yeah, it's really cool. Um, all right, so we're gonna shift to like talking about life with COVID. Um, so like I remember very intensely the moment I heard we were going home. Um, what was that experience like for you? Like the when you like got the call. I remember I was in the erg room at Brown. I was like, oh no. And yeah, I'm just curious about what your experience was like with that.
I remember the day that everything fell apart. It was actually the same day that the preseason polls came out for rowing. So in the morning, the first poll came out, and our team was ranked first in the country for the first time in like ever.
Yeah.
And then like literally hours later, we get an email that our season is canceled and we're getting kicked off campus. Um, and I remember reaching out to a senior on the team who I was really close with, knowing that it'd be really devastating for her, and asked, hey, do you want to go for a run? And we went for a very angry, very hard run. And then we had a team meeting after that, which was very emotional, a lot of crying. And then we just had to kind of go on with the week. And I remember it being a really hectic week. It was midterms. I don't think anyone did any of their work. I was really emotional. I probably cried every hour. Um, but it was a lot of trying to fit things in with the seniors, trying to pack. No one really understood what the pandemic would mean. We just kind of knew that we were going to go home, which I wasn't super excited about. I haven't been home for a long time since going to Princeton. So I came home my freshman year for winter break, which was like 2 weeks, went back to campus, went straight from campus to a summer internship in DC, came home for another 2 weeks, went back to campus, did the same thing sophomore year, was home for a little more time that summer for about 3 weeks, went straight back for junior year. So I really hadn't been home for more than a couple of weeks in a few years. So I was not super excited about going back and having to do school there and not having rowing or my team or my friends. Yeah, it was a really hard week.
Yeah. What was when you got home? What was life like for you at home? What was home like?
But my house is very small. So Like I've been in dorms about the size of like the first floor of my house. So coming home, it was the automatic adjustment to having less space, worse internet connection. And my mom is a special ed teacher. She is a teaching assistant for K through second grade. And my little brother is still in high school, and their schools went virtual. So it was a small house with three of us trying to do online school, um, which was hard. Very loud at times, very distracting at times. Again, unstable internet connections. Yeah, it was also, I'm from Long Island, New York, and in the beginning of the pandemic, we locked down really early. A lot of restrictions, and it was quite scary because there was a lot of conflicting information over like whether or not you should go grocery shopping, or if you should be storing extra food or not, if you should wear a mask or not. My mom's immunocompromised, so I was really scared going to grocery stores with her. My parents definitely bought into the we're going to stock a lot of food downstairs, which I thought was really silly. But again, hearing my parents' experiences growing up very poor with food insecurity, it made a lot of sense to me why they got so nervous, even though like our house is already overflowing with food. Like on a normal day outside of the pandemic, you can go into our cabinets and we could probably survive for like 6 weeks on what we have. And I think, again, that is left over from growing up in food insecurity. But then the idea of there being food shortages, we started a whole another pantry in our basement, which I thought, again, was silly, but that's what we were doing. Yeah. My little brother also kind of understood what COVID is, but kind of doesn't. So he was very scared, and it was hard to try and talk to him about how there's no need to be that scared, was going to take precautions. He would ask like, when it's going to be over? We have no clue. So it was definitely an adjustment.
Yeah, that's interesting. What was the academic adjustment like for you? Like, was it hard did it take like a toll on your academics? Was it difficult?
I think my academics improved, to be honest. Very much the type of person that will turn to work when I want to be comforted. I hadn't started writing my junior paper when we got sent home, and like the week that we got sent home, I had like 30 pages done. So it definitely helped that, being able to just sit down and focus on that instead of rowing or anything else. It definitely was more stressful. I had planned my spring semester purposely to limit the amount of days I was in class. So I only had class on Mondays and Wednesdays, which at school was great, but at home was really draining, because that would mean that essentially Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I wouldn't see anybody who wasn't my parents. And then on Monday and Wednesday, I would spend all day on Zoom. So I kind of screwed myself with that schedule, but I had no idea that we would be doing that.
Yeah. How do you think Princeton was with like accommodating to it all? Like, is there things that they did do or didn't do that you?
Well, they made their pass fail policy, I had a lot of issues with, because it felt like the administration just didn't want to make a decision. So they deferred to individual departments and individual teachers to make that decision. So my department allowed for pass fails, but didn't mandate it. I know other departments that didn't allow for pass fails. And then I had one teacher that went mandatory pass fail, which was, I understand the context behind it, where he came onto class and gave us a whole lecture about how we all had very different resources at the moment, different environments, and that he couldn't objectively grade us and couldn't justify giving out letter grades that semester. But at the same time, after having gone through half the class and been performing really well at that point, and had been banking on that class as being one that would boost my GPA, that was stressful. I had other classes that had to completely restructure. So I had this one course that hadn't had any graded assignments before we left because a majority of our assignments was the midterm, which got canceled, and a final in-class, like 2-day simulation of Congress. So the entire structure of the class had to be shifted to a bunch of projects that pretty much happened every week, which was annoying, especially because we had already been prepping for the simulation beforehand. But the administration, just didn't make decisions, just deferred them. So you had a lot of differing policies, which I felt was more unfair. Depending on what major you were able to pass fail or not. Depending on what classes you were in, they were pass fail or not. They requested that professors become more lenient, and I don't really think professors took that to heart. But again, overall, it helped my academics. So I definitely benefited from being home and having more pass fails and having more time to focus on school.
Yeah. I'm glad that it was like you were able to navigate it. How was it on your like mental health? How was your emotional state through it all?
I was really sad a lot. I had to make a lot of attempts to get out of the house, go for walks, try and do things. I found myself sleeping a lot. I was really stressed for finals, but throughout the semester, I was not too overwhelmed. Just like the last week, I found really stressful, as well as trying to figure out what you were going to do that summer. A lot of summer internship plans fell through, and that it's a big pressure at Princeton to have a summer internship lined up and to have something to go on your resume. So it was stressful to try and figure that out at the same time of managing academics.
Okay. Huh. How do you, so you mentioned your little brother and your dad. Like, how do you think your family was doing through it all? Like any.
I think my little brother really liked going to online school initially.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was great for him. He doesn't really like going to school. He doesn't like his teachers or the people there. So it was great for him to just be able to go online and do work. It was definitely very stressful for my mom because, again, she's a teaching assistant for K through second grade special ed kids who just were having a lot of issues, like sitting in front of a Zoom camera, and how do you do a lot of their activities are very hands-on and they couldn't really guide them. And that was really stressful for her. And my dad was just bracing for layoffs. Union leader, people are no longer taking the railroad because everything's virtual, people aren't going out. They're coming. So he was just trying to manage how is he going to get his union through the pandemic and keep people healthy, make sure that the railroads doing policies that were containing outbreaks, because there were quite a few early outbreaks among people who worked on the trains, but then also trying to make sure that no one gets laid off, like cutting back hours for everyone instead of losing jobs, things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think, so first of all, you mentioned a little bit about your family background. Do you identify as a first generation college student?
I do, yeah.
Do you think that's added any complexities to your experience at Princeton? And this might be going back into what we were talking about a little bit, but I feel like there's more.
I think I'm very aware of the privileges of going to college and the privileges of going to Princeton specifically. And I'm not sure if that's specifically linked to being first gen or coming from a less resourced community or just growing up with my parents and my brother. But I think that's something that's not acknowledged well at this university. I think administrators make a big point of commenting on the privilege of going to university, and people will very readily admit it, but then there's not a responsibility of doing something with that. It's just kind of like accepting it and moving on. And that wasn't my experience. I felt really guilty my freshman year being here, particularly because I had like hyped up like an Ivy League so much in my head as this really inaccessible place full of geniuses where I would fail. And getting here and meeting people, not to say that people here aren't smart, but they're definitely not as intimidating or as talented or as really extraordinary as I had imagined. And then realizing that there were people back in my community who would have done equally well, if not better here, and who were looked over because the admission process doesn't really account for communities like mine. Like being recruited, I went to several admission departments before applying with my transcript and my test scores, talking about them, but my odds of getting in. And I had several admission departments tell me to my face that like my GPA meant nothing because it wasn't from a credible high school. And I can only imagine that that was probably the reaction to a lot of my peers who had similar test scores as me, similar GPAs as me, did other extracurriculars and that weren't athletics and therefore didn't get recruited and therefore did not get into these prestigious schools. So like for context, my school ranked every single student and it made a big deal of like the top 10 students. Your GPAs were published in the local newspaper. It was announced over the loudspeaker. You got medals. You were the first 10 to graduate at graduation. Like it was a big, big thing. And the differences between some of us were on a 100-point scale, 0.001. So we were all very close academically. But some of those differences meant like I went to Princeton, one person went to UPenn, one person went to Duke, and then a lot went to just state schools, which are really good schools, but they didn't go there because that was their dream school. They went there because that was the best school they got accepted to, or community colleges. Right. And it had very little to do with what we actually did and more to do with how admissions looked at our resumes. So I came into Princeton really aware of that and really guilty for being there and felt the need to try and give back to the community in some way or try to redirect resources to other people. And I got really involved with Special Olympics and other service-oriented activities here because of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Special Olympics. Like, could you tell us a little bit about that? And then also, like on to like how it has been moving Special Olympics, the program, like online through Zoom. Be great to hear about.
Yeah, so there's a Special Olympic rowing program here, and I'm under the impression it's one of the only ones in the country at a collegiate level. I know it was the pilot program for Special Olympics New Jersey. They approached Princeton about 7 years ago asking if they would start a program, and the students did, and it's grown since, and now it has both an on-the-water component and an erging component, and we went from having about 10 Special Olympic athletes to about 40, so we've really grown. I got involved my freshman year because one of the seniors on my team helped lead the program and really encourage people to come. And from having a brother with a disability, I was somewhat aware of what Special Olympics was and what they did, and had gone to similar programs, but never as a volunteer, always as a family member there to support my brother. So I was really excited about the opportunity to be on the other side of it and get to volunteer and help other people and help other families, because I was very closely related to the benefits of the program and knew how it worked. And I really fell in love with it, went every weekend my freshman year and took over the program. And yeah, I just think it's a really great way to open up the resources at collegiate boathouses, because there are so many resources at our boathouse. We get new equipment so frequently. We have a lot of just like intellectual resources in the athletes themselves who like are very well trained in the sport of rowing and are very good at training other people in it. Um, and rowing is a historically really inaccessible sport. So a great way to combat that is to open your boathouse to the community and invite people in. So it's a great program, really love it. And when we went online last spring, we decided that we would reach out and see if anyone wanted to do online like body weight circuits, which was unusual because normally the program only runs in the fall and the winter. And then when we go into spring racing season, we end the program because the student athletes usually don't have the time for it. And we normally don't do anything over the summer. So we figured that if we were feeling isolated and lonely during that spring pandemic, that there were probably athletes out there that were also really isolated and didn't have contact with each other, and that this would be a good thing to do. So every weekend since about April, we've been running these sessions. And we have a group of about like 8 to 10 people who come, and they really seem to enjoy it. It really makes my weekend. I think it's been a really great way to continue to engage throughout the pandemic. And honestly, we see each other more than we would have if we were in person.
That's awesome. Yeah. So going on to rowing, we talked about it a little bit with kind of like the change between cultures that you feel. Like you talked about going to, in a way, race course and like seeing like basically like these like teams like it's a very like largely white affluent sport. um what do you think about, like, and this is a pretty general question, so take it wherever you want, but what do you think about the movement to get people of color more involved in the sport, like with in mind like the book A Most Beautiful Thing or the Rowing in Color podcast, or like maybe do you think that your experience in the sport has been at all complicated from being a Latinx person?
Well, I should say that I specifically started rowing my sophomore year of high school with the intent of being recruited to college, because we kind of realized that my community wasn't somewhere that really sent people to college, didn't know how we would afford it, realized that sports were a great way to get a scholarship somewhere, and then did some research, found out that women's rowing had a lot of scholarship opportunities, and I started with that. So I, in high school, had this background of being there purely to be recruited, which I think made it feel more of a job than other athletes there who really like loved the sport and really enjoyed it, and it was really like a bonus like thing that they got to do. And for me, it was a lot more like, I need to hit this 2K PR, I need to be lighter, I need to be faster, or I'm not going to go to college. So it was really stressful for me. We trained 7 days a week. I woke up on school days at 4:30 to go to the gym with my dad, and then I'd go to school. I didn't take a lunch period. I snacked throughout the day. I'd go home. We'd drive to official practice after. I'd do a 2-hour session, come back home, do my homework. We had practice both Saturday and Sunday. That were like 3 to 4 hour sessions. So it was really draining. I really hated it. I didn't do any athletics before rowing, so I had to get in shape really quickly, which was not fun. I realized quite soon that I was short, so I had to be lightweight, even though I wasn't naturally that light. So I lost about 25 to 30 pounds in a couple months. It was really stressful. And
A couple months? Wow.
yeah, it wasn't fun. I developed a lot of eating disorder tendencies by the end. Switched teams a lot, and definitely felt different from the other athletes there. Again, it was way more of a job for me. I felt like I had way less opportunities, or that it was never, I never assumed that I would go to a good school. Where I think there were some people on my team who were also trying to be recruited, but had a very much a higher bar for who they would talk to, because they had the expectation that they would go to an elite school. And I remember talking to upwards of like 15, 20 coaches at a time from literally any school that I would reach out, because I just wanted to go to school.
That's it's interesting that you say that, that it was like kind of a means to an end, not an end to itself, because of like the level that you're at right now. Like you're possibly going to be rowing at the world championship this summer. Like how did the sport transform for you from like a means to an end to like something that you have great passion in?
Well, I think that really happened once I got to Princeton, because
Mhm.
then like the end has been achieved. Like I'm at school, and I was the summer before, especially because the Ivy League doesn't give out athletic scholarships, there was quite literally no real incentive to stick with the sport. If you went to a non-Ivy League and you had an athletic scholarship, you would have to obviously compete to keep your scholarship. But at Princeton, once you had been admitted, I could very easily just not do it anymore. And they couldn't rescind my admissions. They couldn't touch any financial aid I had. I would just not be there. And it was definitely something I considered. Also, when you pair that with my anxiety about how am I ever going to pass Princeton and do a Division I sport,
Mhm.
I was really nervous coming in. But I also felt an obligation, because I was very aware, and this thing the coach said to me while being recruited, that I would never have gotten in without being recruited. And now, as a senior who has been admitted to other elite schools, who's done really well here, I know it's not a reflection on me and my capabilities, but again, the admission system. But regardless, I would not have been here if I didn't get that recruiting spot. And there were other people who wanted that spot. That was another thing that I was considering, that I took a spot from someone else if I didn't just see it through. So I told myself I would do it for the full year. And if at the end of freshman year, I was either really academically struggling or really hated it, then I could quit. But that didn't happen. I really loved having a team. That was like a really new experience for me. In high school, our team was about 4 girls. It was really small. It was really intercompetitive because we were all competing for the same recruiting spots at the same colleges. So it was really different having a supportive team environment and having such a large team and having people willing to like help you pick classes or like give you advice on different things at Princeton, or check in on you and make sure you're doing okay. And I think that really transformed what the sport meant.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you like through COVID, has it been difficult to like keep, because you mentioned like a big part of your love for it is the team. Has it been really hard to like keep your keep the passion running when you're not around your team?
There's been a lot of my training has really fluctuated. I think when we first got kicked off campus, I was really motivated because I didn't imagine that we wouldn't be back, like starting in the fall. And the rest of the spring semester, I trained really hard on my own. And then when it became less clear that we would be back, my training kind of shifted. I wrote a single in high school, and my parents were able to, it made more sense to rent my own shell. And then at some point, it made more sense to just buy that shell because we'd been renting it for so long. So
Yeah.
I had my own boat back home. So at some point, I was able to get out on the water in the middle of the pandemic. And my training was able to shift that way, which really, again, emphasized my appreciation for the sport. And then they told us we wouldn't be coming back in the fall. And I don't think I trained for like a month. And then I was able to live off campus with some teammates, and we got to train all fall together. And that was really motivating. And then knowing that we were going to come back in the spring and potentially have the chance to compete, it was really motivating over winter break. So you have to find different things to look forward to. But
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. That's really interesting. Do you think, like, because you're a senior now, right? You're
Yeah.
just you're just finishing. So this is like kind of one of my final questions, but I was curious, like, what was it like writing your thesis under the constraints of COVID and under the research constraints of COVID, where you just have to work with like digital digital media resources and stuff?
So I'm in the political theory track here, as opposed to a more quantitative field. And the more quantitative fields would have traditionally done experiments and surveys and things like that and gone out and gathered research on their own. But I traditionally would not have done that. So my sources, the main shift was not being able to get books from the library, but I was always going to be using online sources and books primarily. Um, but I really enjoyed writing my thesis. I wrote it on the segregation of students with cognitive disabilities in American public schools. A very personal topic. My little brother was educated in a segregated program, and I think it really disserviced him. Um, so I was really passionate about it, really interested in the topic, which made researching it really fulfilling. Um, Loved writing it, though it was definitely hard at times. There were definitely times where I had to take a little step back and try not to cry, reading some of the realities of what it's like across the country, or finding things out like that New York State is one of the most segregated states in the country. Like, placements vary by state. So then thinking, like, if we were from Connecticut, would my brother have had a different educational experience? Would he have a different life now? Things like that. But because I think it was such an emotionally full topic, I really enjoyed researching it and writing it, and took a lot of pride in my work with it. But yeah, it also was framed differently after being home with my brother for that long again, because I haven't really been home and I haven't been able to spend so much time with him until the pandemic. Um, yeah.
Yeah, dang. Um, is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to talk about? Like anything that my questions missed? 'Cause-
I don't think so.
okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Like, I can't thank you enough, Lauren.